The lemur people are older than Homo sapiens. Much older. They date back 60 million years to the time when Madagascar split from the mainland of Africa. They might be called psychic amphibians. That is, visible only for short periods when they assume a solid form to breathe. But some of them can remain in the invisible state for years at a time. Their way of thinking and feeling is basically different from ours. Time is a human affliction, not a human invention, but a prison. So what is the meaning of 60 million years without time? And what does time mean to foraging lemurs? Lemurs don't need it. 6 minutes, 60 million years, no difference. Nothing is happening. A feeling of desolation closes round the human essence of the thought. How long have the lemurs paraded before each other in their sad and perfect beauty? How long have the singing gibbons sung their timeless song, as little gibbons clinging to their backs attempted to sing too? These are the words of poet and visionary William Seward Burroughs, from his short story entitled The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar. Some would tell you that Burroughs was a lifelong addict, someone whose experiments with mind-altering drugs would forever blur the line between reality and fantasy. Others, however, would tell you that Burroughs had happened upon a secret truth, quite by accident, that would unravel the very fabric of time itself.
I was born February 5, 1914 in St. Louis, Missouri. As a young child, I wanted to be a writer, and I wrote descriptions of corn dances in New Mexico that were much praised by my English teachers. But it was many years before I came back to even any attempts to write. I thought that they led very glamorous lives, living in Tangiers and smoking hashish and sniffing cocaine in Mayfair. It struck as being a very glamorous and easy and pleasant life. Little did I know.
The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar was first published in Omni magazine in April 1987 and went on to form the basis of a novella, Ghost of a Chance, published in 1991. Already in this story, fact and fiction are inseparably intertwined. The story centers on Captain Mission, a real historical personage to whom reference can be found in the infamous tome, A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates, published in London in 1724. According to the General History, Mission, whose first name may have been James or Olivier, was captain of the Victoire and founder of the progressive pirate colony known as Libertatia, a legendary utopia and free port somewhere off the coast of Madagascar. Burroughs' story describes Captain Mission maintaining an uneasy peace with the native Madagascans, a peace predicated on their reverence of the elusive ghost lemur and the sacred taboo surrounding its killing, such that Captain Mission makes the killing of any ghost lemur punishable by death. But, of course, one pirate violates this order, shooting a ghost lemur dead. Burroughs then writes that Captain Mission, after imbibing some local hallucinogens, visits a temple where a phantom ghost lemur summons him to write. He sees a book in his mind's eye, impossibly old, with gilt edges and lithographs. Its title appears in gold script, The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar. Later, the death of the lemur causes an all-out war between the natives and the Libertatians. Captain Mission escapes with a small fleet, but is lost beneath the waves. Then Burroughs writes something very strange. In a pre-recorded and therefore totally predictable universe, the blackest sin is to tamper with the pre-recordings, which could result in altering the pre-recorded future. Captain Mission was guilty of this sin. He threatened to demonstrate for all to see that 300 souls can coexist in relative harmony with each other, their human neighbours, and the ecosphere of flora and fauna. Big Ben strikes the hour. In a muted, ghostly room, the custodians of the future convene. Keepers of the board books. Maktub, it is written, and they don't want it changed. This story, with its curious philosophy of time, finds itself at the centre of one of the most mysterious philosophical movements of the last century. While you may not have heard of it, the Cybernetic and Cultural Research Unit, or CCRU, has been engaged in a war for the fate of the world. All worlds, past and present. A war for all time.
The doctor.
Who's the doctor?
He's the doctor.
Yep, that's me.
Okay, that was scary.
No, it sounds like he's replying, but he always says that.
Yes, I do.
And that.
Yep. And this.
He can hear us. Oh my God, you can really hear us.
Of course he can't hear us. Look. I've got a transcript, see? Everything he says. Yep, that's me. Yes, I do. Yep, and this. Next, it's...
Are you going to read out the whole thing?
Sorry.
Who are you?
I'm a time traveller. Or I was. I'm stuck. In 1969.
We're stuck. All of space and time he promised me. Now I've got a job in a shop. I've got to support him.
Martha?
Sorry.
I've seen this bit before.
Quite possibly.
1969, that's where you're talking from.
Afraid so.
But you're replying to me. You can't know exactly what I'm going to say 40 years before I say it.
38?
I'm getting this down. I'm writing in your bits.
How? How is this possible? Tell me.
Not so fast.
Yeah, people don't understand time. It's not what you think it is.
Then what is it?
Complicated.
Tell me.
Very complicated.
I'm clever and I'm listening, and don't patronise me because people have died and I'm not happy. Tell me.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah, I've seen this bit before. You said that sentence got away from you.
It got away from me, yeah.
Next thing you're going to say is, well, I can hear you.
Well, I can hear you.
This isn't possible.
No, it's brilliant.
Well, not hear you exactly, but I know everything you're going to say.
Always gives me the shivers, that bit.
How can you know what I'm going to say?
Look to your left.
What does he mean by look to your left? I've written tons about that on the forums. I think it's a political statement.
He means you. What are you doing?
I'm writing in your bits. That way I've got a complete transcript of the whole conversation. Wait until this hits the net. This will explode the egg forums.
I've got a copy of the finished transcript. It's on my autocue.
How can you have a copy of the finished transcript? It's still being written.
I told you I'm a time traveller. I got it in the future.
Okay, let me get my head around this. You're reading aloud from a transcript of a conversation you're still having.
Wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
Any attempt to delineate a history of the CCRU is impossible, as its past is also its future, and its future is also past. Its members maintain, paradoxically, that it never has and never will exist. But there is another story, and the story goes like this. The CCRU was a name on a door. Nothing more, nothing less. This particular door happened to exist in the philosophy department of Warwick University in the UK's West Midlands in the year 1998. What little information there is about the CCRU can be found in two communiques issued by the group at its inception. The CCRU, in its own words, was an ongoing experiment in collectivity, collective production, anonymity, and masks. It has no genealogy, geographical centre, biographical attribution, or institutional dependency. Elsewhere, the CCRU claims that it uses and is used by hyperstition to colonize the future, traffic with the virtual, and continually reinvent itself. In one missive entitled The Lemurian Time War, the CCRU writes that they were approached by someone named William Kay, who alleges that William Burroughs was secretly involved in an occult time war. That in actual fact, Burroughs' story, The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar, had retroactively influenced the life of the real Captain Mission, who lived 3 centuries before the story was written. Kay had in fact been dispatched by the board to contain this spiralling temporal anomaly, this wanton act of retrochronology, before it infected other episodes of history. The CCRU describes Burroughs' story as an example of hyperstition, that is, a fiction that makes itself real. They write, "Fiction is not opposed to the real. Rather, reality is understood to be composed of fictions, consistent semiotic terrains that condition perceptive, affective, and behavioral responses." They continue, "Every act of writing is a sorcerous operation, a partisan action in a war where multitudes of factual events are guided by the powers of illusion." Upon becoming increasingly interested in lemurs, Burroughs, according to Kay, found a copy of The Ghost Lemurs of Madagascar that Captain Mission had owned in a university library archive. Upon finding it, Burroughs fell into a trance from which he saw into the jailhouse mind of God. He remembered writing the story, but in a different time and place, as though he was someone else. He became aware that time was an alien prison used to contain humanity, and fiction itself was an epistemic cage used to prevent their textual sorcery from becoming hyperstitional. The first salvo in this magical war was to deny the existence of the magical war itself, according to Kay, by a program of the board known as the One God Universe, which can be understood as a sort of all-encompassing epistemic regime that forecloses all other hyperstitional and magical writing. Kay maintained that Burroughs and Mission were not author and character, but doubles, anachronistic contemporaries, soldiers in a time war against the board, the One God Universe, and control. The key to it all, of course, the ghost lemur, the ghosts of a lost continent, the children of the rift. Lemurs, Burroughs writes, are psychic amphibians. They appear in dreams as often as in the waking world. They come from a time before humanity, or perhaps after it. Echoes of another time.
I just want to throw out a few quotes. First of all, from Marshall McLuhan, who made this point many years, obviously, before it was widely taken up. Again, on the theme of drugs, particularly psychedelics. It is not, he says, uncommon for people on these trips, especially with new chemical drugs as opposed to organic ones, to develop the illusion that they are themselves computers. This, he says, is not so much a hallucination as a discovery. The point's been reinforced recently by Manuel de Landa, who in an interview says, when you trip, you liquefy structures in your brain, linguistic structures, intentional structures. They acquire a less viscous consistency, and your brain becomes a supercomputer. Another quote from Snow Crash. That's a hypercard. I thought you said Snow Crash was a drug, Hero says, totally nonplussed. It is, the guy says. Try it. Does it fuck up your brain, Hero says, or your computer? Both, neither. What's the difference? That's a mixture of fictional and so-called theoretical observations about this same point of a certain moment in which the notion of the body and the computer begin to collapse on each other.
That was Sadie Plant, speaking at the Virtual Futures Conference on the 12th of March, 1994. Plant has the honour of founding the CCRU and was a pioneer of early cyberfeminist philosophy. Her research demonstrated the inherent links between the feminine and computing, between programming and weaving, as well as research on the history of drug use and the revolutionary potential of networks.
Across the time intensity scales, there's a self-replicating pattern beginning to emerge as all channels of communication converge on the cyberspatial plane. Commodities become self-guiding. Capital, it seems, is now leaving the western lands for the ocean with the edge, the Pacific attractor. And out in the west, here where they still set the clocks, the old world order is beginning to fall behind the times. Machine intelligence is converging with a thinking organism as both get drawn onto this chemical plane on which intelligence discovers its own materiality, and communication now has visceral effect. Trance dancers learn to get in touch, hitting the plateau with tantric precision, evading the climax, picking up the news. Even the fake mutates into simulation and makes contact with its own arousing machines. Identities become entranced and enchanted at the limit of the organism, fascinated and facsimilar to the point at which the body tips over onto the plane. The entranced is the accessed, the possessed, the body ridden by its own network of potentialities. It's not just a matter of us going out from the meat, but also the matrix entering the organism.
From its inception, the CCRU was interested in three things: cyberspace, psychoactive drugs, and the future. And even after Planck's swift departure, these three pillars of the unit would continue. Do you remember this man from the previous clip? That is Nick Land, who may or may not be a time-travelling cyborg from the future, or an undead corpse possessed by several interdimensional entities, depending on who you ask. Land became director of the CCRU after Planck had left, after which Warwick University denied that it had ever existed. The group became increasingly para-academic, and according to some, quasi-religious and cultish, given over to increasingly radical and drug-fueled inquiries into the substance of reality.
You find in the structure of societies, in the structure of companies, and in the structure of computers. And all three are moving in the same direction. That is, away from a top-down structure of a central command system, giving the system instructions about how to behave, towards a system that is parallel, that is flat, which is a web, and which change moves from the bottom up. And this is going to happen across all institutions and technical devices. It's the way they work.
That winding road to the hog farm, a lot of the hog farmers were very enamored with style. I can see how we could mesmerize people. At one point, we gathered in this meditation circle and started making the sound of the universe all together. Like that, and in the middle of this home circle, which is quite beautiful, actually, Kelly leaned out the window of his black bus and his wives are leaning out saying, stop going.
Eventually, Land's increasingly erratic behaviour led to his forced retirement from Warwick University, and the CCRU relocated to a local apartment in the nearby town of Leamington Spa. The group referred to this as a strategic retreat, comparing themselves to the defection of Colonel Kurtz in the film Apocalypse Now. Indeed, when the journalist Simon Reynolds visited the group in 1998, he discovered, like Captain Willard, that the further one travels up the Nung River towards Kurtz, towards land and the heart of darkness, the more reality and time seems to break down around you.
What did they tell you? They told me that you had gone totally insane. And that your methods were unsound. Are my methods unsound? I don't see any method at all.
Former CCRU member Robin Mackay had this to say about land's deterioration.
Let's get this out of the way. In any normative, clinical, or social sense of the word, very simply, Land did go mad. Afterwards, he did not shrink from meticulously documenting this process, as if writing up a failed experiment. Wretchedly, for Land, it was no longer possible to tell whether his speculative epiphanies had been, as he had believed at the height of his delirium, glimmers of access to the transcendental, or just the pathetic derangements of a psyche pushed to the derisory limits of its tolerance. The experiment was over.
It's impossible through words to describe what is necessary to those who do not know what horror means. Horror. Horror has a face, and you must make a friend of horror. Horror and moral terror are your friends. If they are not, then they are enemies to be feared.
This invasion from the outside, from the absolute outside, is the distilled essence of horror.
Land's decline eventually spelled the end for the CCRU. In 2003, it officially disbanded. But the CCRU was never reducible to its psychotic leader. It was an anonymous collective. Each of their communiques, essays, fictions, and installations were attributed to the group as a whole, a singular entity with a singular will. Besides Plant and Land, one of the most famous alumni of the CCRU is the cultural theorist Mark Fisher. After leaving the CCRU and becoming one of the few to emerge with a PhD, Fisher went on to write capitalist realism and earned a cult following in his own right through his music writing on the blog K-Punk. Fisher took the CCRU's preoccupation with time travel and temporal loops forwards into his own writings, understanding this in a less literal sense than his predecessors. For Fisher, the future had been cancelled, and we are haunted by the futures that we have lost to the forces of techno-capital. Ghosts, then, are not the residue of a past that still clings to the present, but echoes that ripple out from a future catastrophe.
When one thinks back to the mid-90s, when the Virtual Futures conferences were happening, in a sense, much of what was predicted at those conferences has become part of everyday life, has become taken for granted. But there's a sense in which since then, everything has changed, but nothing has really happened. This is partly what is behind my book, Capitalist Realism, which is really in a way, the disappointed story of someone who had been hyped up by the sort of Landian sort of the euphoria of dissolution that we experienced in the 90s, and particularly at Warwick. And then who sort of crashed back down into the kind of shocking banality of the first decade of the 21st century.
Sadly, in 2017, Fisher took his own life at his home in Felixstowe at the age of 48, 20 years after his involvement in the CCRU.
How much you want to make a bet I can throw a football over them mountains? Yeah, if Coach would have put me in fourth quarter, we'd have been state champions, no doubt. No doubt in my mind. You better believe things would have been different. I'd have gone pro. In a heartbeat. I'd be making millions of dollars and living in a big old mansion somewhere. You know, soaking it up in a hot tub with my soulmate. Kip, I reckon you know a lot about cyberspace. You ever come across anything like time travel?
Easy. I've already looked into it for myself.
Right on. Right on.
As the prospect of the new millennium approached, many came to believe that a simple coding error would result in the end of civilization. A formatting problem in the way dates are encoded meant it would be impossible for computers to distinguish between 2000 and 1900, causing widespread malfunction. A computer-induced apocalypse. Suddenly, the great potential of cyberspace that the CCRU had spent years theorizing about became the Great Terror.
Todd and his family are preparing for the downside of Y2K should it come to pass.
You know, there's people out there that I've talked to that said, there's nothing going to happen. What are you basing that on? Nobody knows. No one. Chicken noodle.
They've stocked their shelves with soups.
Chicken noodle.
More than you'd find in some convenience stores.
Somebody really liked chicken noodle.
From soup to meat, their freezer is nearly overflowing.
Let's see, we got your Y2K beef tenderloin.
There's also dry goods and canned fruit, batteries, generators, and medicine. It's no longer a basement. It has the look and feel of a general store.
You know, we're average, everyday folk that, you know, are a little concerned, and we're not going to depend on somebody else to take care of us if something does happen.
But for all this talk of the Y2K computer bug, Todd is not buying into that.
I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a computer problem. I think it's going to be a social and people problem.
Instead, as Mark Fisher noted, everything changed, but nothing happened. The apocalypse did not arrive, but somehow everything remained frozen after the change. The Y2K bug was real. It is no longer possible to distinguish between 2000 and 1900, between future and past, as the forces of capital keep us in hypostasis, stuck out of time. Y2K was a retrovirus, a virus that retrochronically activated itself, propagating backwards through time, infecting the past and inoculating the future. Cells split and timelines diverge. Everywhere the logic of the rift can be found, and everywhere the virus of language spreads its disease. Time is a human affliction, not a human invention, but a prison. So what is the meaning of 60 million years without time? And what does time mean to foraging lemurs?
The first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you. If I could make days last forever, if words could make wishes come true, I'd save every day like a treasure, and then again I would spend them with you.